Why would a single night with an ex cost me my marriage? How could one harmless joke about other men lead my husband to take back the ring he once swore he'd never remove? What happens when the person you mock for being too serious finally stops being kind? My name is Delyne. I'm 32, married, and apparently too funny for my own good. That's what people always say about me. I like attention, I like laughter, and I like to keep things light. Evan, my husband, never really understood that part of me. He's quiet, serious, always measuring his words like each one costs him money. I used to tell him that his calmness made me feel safe. Now it just makes me feel bored. At parties, I was the one keeping everyone entertained, teasing him about how I could do better if I wanted. It was a joke. Everyone laughed, even him sometimes. But lately, he stopped laughing. He said I didn't know the difference between humor and cruelty. I said he didn't know the difference between confidence and control. He hated when I joked about other men, co-workers, actors, even the waiter at dinner once. I told him he should be proud that people found his wife attractive. He said, "I don't care if they do. I care that you do." That line stuck with me, not because it hurt, but because of how calm he was when he said it. Then came the reunion. My ex, Jace, showed up. It was supposed to be nothing, just dinner, laughter, memories. I told Evan about it beforehand, half to prove I was honest, half to make him jealous. He didn't argue. He just said, "You like testing people. One day someone will stop playing." I didn't understand what he meant until the night he took his ring back. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. Evan always said I took things too far. He never shouted it. That wasn't his style. He'd just go quiet, and that silence was worse than anger. I could handle yelling. I knew how to turn anger into guilt. But quiet left me alone with my thoughts, and that was unbearable. When we first married, my sense of humor was part of what he loved. He used to say I made life brighter, that I reminded him not to take everything so seriously. Somewhere along the way, that same humor became a weapon. I didn't mean for it to happen, not consciously at least, but when the jokes started landing harder than they should, I didn't stop. I liked the attention. At dinners with friends, I'd tease him lightly. If someone mentioned money, I'd say, "Well, Evan counts receipts in his sleep. That's romance for you." When someone brought up relationships, I'd joke, "If I ever run away, it'll be with someone who can actually dance." Everyone laughed. Evan smiled politely. But later, in the car, he said things like, "You humiliate me when you talk like that." I'd roll my eyes, say it was just a joke, that he was too sensitive. He'd sigh, look out the window, and say nothing more. I'd feel like I'd won the argument simply because he stopped fighting. My mother, Diana, thought I was funny. She said Evan was too stiff. "You're keeping the marriage alive," she told me. "Men like that need women who tease them." I liked that idea, that I was the spark, the interesting one. Even at work, people knew me for my humor. My team adored me. I'd walk into meetings, cracking jokes about clients, flirting lightly with the sales guys, playing up my charm. I called it confidence. Evan called it disrespect. One evening after a long day, we sat watching TV. I scrolled through photos from work, team dinners, happy hours, group selfies. Evan glanced over and saw one of me with two male colleagues. We were laughing, and one of them had his arm around my shoulder. He asked, "Why is he holding you like that?" I said, "It's a friendly picture." He said, "Would you be fine if I had a picture like that with a woman?" I laughed, said, "If you could get a woman to touch you that easily, maybe I'd finally be impressed." He didn't reply. He just stared at the screen, then turned off the TV. Later that night, I noticed he wasn't wearing his wedding ring. It was sitting on the nightstand. I asked if he'd taken it off for comfort. He said, "No, I took it off because jokes need an audience, and I'm done playing along. I tried to turn it into another joke, asked if he was threatening divorce over a ring. He said, "No, I'm promising peace over silence." Then he went to sleep. The next morning, he was polite. Too polite. He made coffee for both of us, asked if I needed a ride to work. That made me nervous. I preferred him angry. At least, that meant I could control the story. Calm meant he was thinking. At work, my friend Tara noticed something was off. I told her Evan was sulking again. She said, "You push his buttons for sport." I said, "It's not my fault he has so many." That night, I posted a photo with my co-workers. 3 men and me at a team dinner. The caption read, "Best men, best night." It was lighthearted, innocent. The likes came quickly. People commented things like, "You always look so happy." Evan didn't say a word about it. But when I went to bed, his ring was still gone. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like preparation. The reunion invitation came 2 weeks later, a message from an old college friend. They were organizing a small get-together at a restaurant downtown. I hadn't thought about those people in years, but I liked the idea of dressing up, laughing, feeling like myself again. When I mentioned it to Evan, he asked, "Will Jace be there?" Jace. My ex. The one I dated before Evan. We'd ended things years ago, but there had always been a kind of open-ended energy between us. That comfortable teasing you can only have with someone who once knew you too well. I told Evan, "Probably, but it's not like that." He said, "You like testing people. One day someone will stop playing." I told him he was being paranoid. He said, "I'm just paying attention." That night, I told Diana what he'd said. She laughed, said, "Men never get over old insecurities. Go, have fun. You're allowed to have friends." So I went. The restaurant was warm and full of laughter. When I arrived, Jace was already there. Older, a little tired-looking, but still charming. He hugged me like no time had passed. "You look exactly the same," he said. I laughed, said, "I hope that's a compliment." The group reminisced about college, about trips, about nights none of us remembered clearly. We ordered wine, toasted to old times. It felt easy, familiar. I told myself it was harmless. Jace made me laugh. He always could. Every time he leaned closer to whisper something, I felt the old thrill, the kind that made me feel young again. When someone pulled out a phone for photos, Jace slipped his arm around my shoulders. I didn't move away. Someone said, "You two look like you never broke up." I laughed, pretending it was just nostalgia. Later that night, as people left one by one, Jace offered to walk me to my car. It was raining lightly. I said he didn't have to, but he insisted. We stood under the awning for a few minutes, talking about life, marriages, careers, how quickly time passes. He said, "You seem restless, Mara. You always were." I said, "Maybe I just picked someone who doesn't laugh enough." He said, "Or maybe you just stopped being funny to him." That line stung more than I expected. I tried to smile, said he didn't know what he was talking about. He shrugged, said, "I knew you better than anyone once." When the rain slowed, I thanked him and got in my car. He leaned in and kissed my cheek. It wasn't planned. I froze for a second, but didn't pull away fast enough. I told myself it didn't mean anything. Just a goodbye. Just a memory. I drove home feeling strange. Not guilty, exactly, but charged. Like I'd gotten away with something. When I walked in, Evan was sitting on the couch, laptop open. He didn't look up right away. Then he said, "Did you have fun?" I said, "Yes. It was nice seeing everyone." He said, "Including him?" I paused. We talked. That's all. He nodded once, closed his laptop and said, "You're free to do whatever you want. Just don't call it marriage when you do." I rolled my eyes, told him he was being ridiculous. He said, "You think you're untouchable because you hide behind humor. But the truth doesn't need to be loud. I went to bed angry, convinced he was overreacting. The next morning, when I reached for my phone, I saw a text from him. "Hope you enjoyed your night with him." There was a link attached. It was a photo from someone's social media, the one from the restaurant. Jace's arm around me, both of us smiling, faces close, the kind of photo that said more than I ever wanted it to. I froze. Then I texted back, "You're being childish." He didn't reply. That day at work, Tara asked if I was okay. I told her Evan was being dramatic about the reunion. She looked uncomfortable and said, "There's a picture going around. People are talking." I asked what she meant. She said someone posted a group photo from that night, and a few people had tagged me. Comments like, "Old sparks never die and still the same chemistry." I laughed, said it was harmless nostalgia. Tara didn't laugh. She said quietly, "It doesn't look that way." I spent the rest of the day pretending not to care, but my stomach was tight the whole time. Every time my phone buzzed, I expected another message from Evan, but there was nothing. When I got home that night, his ring was gone again. Not on the nightstand this time, not anywhere. Instead, there was a folded note on my pillow. "You said everything you do is a joke. So is this. Try laughing." That's when it hit me. The calmness wasn't forgiveness. It was preparation. He wasn't leaving in anger. He was leaving in control, and that terrified me more than anything else ever had. For the next few days, I tried to act normal. I told myself Evan just needed to cool off, that once he realized how ridiculous he was being, he'd put the ring back on, and things would go back to how they were. That was the pattern with us. He'd retreat into silence, I'd charm him out of it, and we'd reset. But this time, the silence stretched longer than usual, and something in his calmness made me uneasy. He didn't yell or accuse me. He just stopped engaging. He still did everything he was supposed to, paid bills, made breakfast for Mia, took out the trash, but with a sort of mechanical precision. When I tried to talk, he'd listen politely, nod, and then go back to whatever he was doing. I started to feel like a guest in my own house. One evening, I came home to find him sitting in the kitchen, sorting through papers. I tried to lighten the mood, asked if he was building a secret bunker for all the emotions he refused to express. He said, without looking up, "You're still trying to make a joke out of everything." I told him it was better than making a tragedy. He finally looked at me and said, "This is already a tragedy, Mara. You just don't see it yet." I said, "You're being dramatic." He said, "You're being careless." I turned to leave, but then he added, "You don't even know what you've lost yet." Later that night, I noticed the small wooden box on his dresser, the one where he kept important things like watch bands, cufflinks, and the ring he'd taken off. It was gone. I searched the drawers, checked the shelves. Nothing. When he came to bed, I asked where it was. He said, "I returned it to its owner." I frowned. "What does that even mean?" He said, "You made it clear you didn't want it." I tried to laugh. "Oh, come on. You're not actually this petty." He said, "No, I'm practical. Petty is lying and calling it humor." I told him he was twisting everything to make himself the victim. He didn't respond. He just rolled over, and the silence between us felt heavier than any fight we'd ever had. The next morning, I called my mother, Diana. I told her Evan was being unreasonable. She said, "He's always been like that, honey. Cold and prideful. Let him stew. He'll come around." But he didn't come around. He got quieter, more methodical. He started leaving early for work, coming home late. When I asked what he was doing, he said, "Getting things in order." I told myself that meant he was throwing himself into his job to avoid the issue, but something about the phrasing bothered me. At work, Tara looked at me differently now. She still talked to me, but her tone had changed. Less friendly, more cautious. I asked her what was wrong. She said, "People talk, Mara. They saw the picture." I said, It was nothing, she said. Then why does it look like something? I didn't answer. That weekend, Evan's mother, Lydia, called. She said she wanted to see Mia. When she arrived, she barely looked at me. As she was leaving, she said quietly, "Evan doesn't deserve this." I asked, "Deserve what?" She looked at me for a moment and said, "Being made a fool of in front of strangers." Then she walked away. That night I sat on the couch scrolling through old photos. Our wedding, Mia's first birthday, vacations. In every picture, Evan was the same, steady, quiet, patient. I tried to remember the last time I'd seen him smile at me that way. I couldn't. When he came home, I asked if we could talk. He said, "We've already talked. You just never listened." I said, "You're making this bigger than it is." He said, "No, you're making it smaller because that's how you live, with everything minimized, disguised as humor." He walked past me and went to the study. I followed him, angry now. "So what? You're perfect? You never flirted with anyone? You never got attention you liked?" He said, "No, because I knew the difference between attention and respect." Then he shut the study door. When I woke up the next morning, I saw a folder on the counter labeled Financial Records. I didn't think much of it until I noticed it was addressed to a law office. I asked him what it was. He said, "Paperwork." I said, "For what?" He said, "For peace." He left for work, and I stood there, staring at the envelope, my hands shaking. I wanted to believe he was bluffing, but deep down, I knew he wasn't. I always thought Evan's temper would be the thing to end us. Not because he was ever violent, he wasn't, but because his restraint was so absolute that if it ever cracked, I imagined something catastrophic would follow. But now, as everything unraveled, I realized he wasn't going to yell. He didn't need to. He'd weaponized calm. When the legal letter came, I was in the middle of a meeting. My phone buzzed with an email notification. Notice of marital separation inquiry. I froze. I told myself it was probably a mistake, some automated message. But when I opened it, I saw his name, his lawyer's name, and a scheduled mediation date. I excused myself from the meeting, went to the bathroom, and just stood there, staring at the mirror. My reflection looked foreign. That night, I waited for him to come home. When he did, I was ready, angry, defensive, rehearsed. I said, "You're filing paperwork behind my back?" He said, "I'm filing paperwork because talking doesn't work." I said, "You're going to ruin everything over one photo?" He said, "It's not the photo. It's the years before it. The photo just told the truth out loud." I said, "You're so self-righteous. Do you think you're perfect?" He said, "No, but I don't humiliate the person I claim to love for sport." I felt my chest tighten. "You're twisting things," I said. "I was joking. You know me." He said, "That's the problem, Mara. I do." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look angry. He just walked past me, took a small notebook from his bag, and placed it on the counter. "This is everything," he said. When he left the room, I opened it. Inside were notes, dates, places, screenshots printed and stapled. Every time I'd made a joke about him in public. Every photo, every caption, every time he'd been the quiet man in the background of my performance. I slammed it shut. I couldn't breathe. I called my mother, told her Evan was trying to destroy me with records. She said, "He's bluffing. He just wants to scare you." But he wasn't bluffing. The next day I went to his office, ready to make a scene. His receptionist hesitated when I asked to see him, but she let me through. I stormed into his office and said, "You can't do this to me." He looked up from his desk, completely unbothered. "I'm not doing anything to you," he said. "I'm just documenting what you did." I said, "You're pathetic, collecting evidence like some courtroom drama." He said, "It's not drama, it's reality, and it's long overdue." He gestured toward the folder on his desk, neatly labeled Marital Conduct Documentation. "I didn't want this, Mara. You did. You built it every time you laughed at me instead of with me. I wanted to scream, to knock the papers off his desk, to break that calm expression. Instead, I said, "You'll regret this." He said, "I already did. That's why I'm done." He turned back to his computer. The conversation was over. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the empty seat across from me. That's when I finally realized something I hadn't before. Evan didn't need to leave loudly. He'd already left quietly months ago. I just hadn't noticed. Later that night, I got a message from Tara. "I'm sorry, but HR asked if I could confirm your relationship with Jace." I didn't say anything, but I think Evan's lawyer reached out. I felt the room tilt. "He wouldn't," I whispered, but of course he would. Everything he was doing was legal, clean, deliberate. When I told Diana, she was outraged. "He's making you sound like a criminal," I said. "He's just efficient." She said, "You need to fight back. Don't let him control the story." But I knew she didn't understand. There was no story left to control. Evan had taken that too. A week later, I got a new envelope from his lawyer's office. Inside was an official notice requesting a preliminary mediation meeting and a financial disclosure form. At the bottom of the letter, in Evan's handwriting, was a note. "You said I don't laugh enough. I'm laughing now." I ripped it in half. That night, I sat on the floor in Mia's room, watching her sleep. Her small fingers clutched a stuffed bear Evan had bought her. I wondered what she'd remember when she grew up. Her father's kindness or her mother's jokes. For the first time, the silence in the house didn't feel like punishment. It felt like consequence. Evan never yelled. He never slammed doors or threw words like knives. He didn't have to. Every document he filed was a sentence in a language I was just learning too late. And the ring? I finally understood why I couldn't find it. He hadn't hidden it. He'd returned it to the lawyer as evidence. The morning of mediation felt unreal. I dressed carefully, choosing a pale gray dress and simple earrings, something that said, "reasonable wife." I wanted to look calm, balanced, misunderstood, but dignified. That's what I told myself, that if I looked composed enough, the truth would bend toward me like it always did. When I walked into the office, the smell of coffee and printer ink hit me first. Evan was already there, sitting across the long wooden table. His posture was straight, his expression polite but unreadable. He looked like he'd rehearsed peace. The mediator introduced herself, then asked if we were ready to begin. I smiled tightly and said yes. Evan only nodded. The first few minutes were practical, confirming names, addresses, signatures. I felt a small rush of confidence. Maybe this would be fine. Maybe I could steer it. Then the mediator opened the folder in front of her. "We're here to discuss property division and child custody," she said, "as well as the behavioral documentation provided by Mr. Delyne." Behavioral documentation. The phrase sounded clinical, detached, until Evan's lawyer began laying out evidence one sheet at a time. The first page was a printout of my social media posts. Every caption I'd written about better men, every joke I'd made at Evan's expense, every photo from work dinners or that reunion. Beneath each was a date and time. This material, his lawyer said evenly, was publicly available and therefore admissible as context. I felt heat rising in my face. I said, "You're really turning Instagram into a court case?" Evan said, "You turned our marriage into a comedy routine. I'm just showing the script." The mediator asked us to stay civil. I folded my arms and forced a smile. "Fine. Then let's be honest. You're doing this because your ego's bruised." Evan didn't respond. He simply pushed another document forward, a financial record. The hotel receipt from the night of the reunion. My name, my card. One room, one bed. My throat closed. "That's not what it looks like," I said quickly. "I just stayed late talking. I didn't even—" The mediator stopped me gently. "We're not here to debate intent, Mrs. Delyne. We're here to understand consequence. I wanted to scream. Instead, I said, "You're acting like I committed a crime." Evan said, "No crime, just betrayal." His voice wasn't cold or sharp. It was soft, almost tired. That hurt more than anger would have. The mediator took notes, flipping through the pages with calm precision. I could feel my composure slipping, my fingers shaking slightly on the table. I hated that he looked so calm, so certain. Then came the custody part. The mediator said, "Mr. Delyne is requesting primary custody of Mia, with structured visitation for Mrs. Delyne." I snapped. "You're taking my child away because I made jokes?" Evan said, "Because you made choices." I said, "You're trying to destroy me." He said, "No, I'm trying to protect her, from the same chaos I lived with." Tears stung my eyes. I didn't want to cry in front of him, but the words came out anyway. "You don't get to rewrite everything we've been through." He said, "You already did that when you started telling strangers what a joke I was." The mediator called for a short break. I went to the restroom and locked the door. My reflection in the mirror didn't look like me. Red eyes, trembling hands, mouth pressed too tight. I told myself I could still fix it, that I just needed to talk to him privately, to remind him of who we were. But deep down, I knew that version of us was gone. When I came back, the mediator asked for final statements. I said I regretted hurting him, that I never meant for things to go this far, that I'd been lonely and misunderstood. Evan said, "She always says sorry when it's too late to matter." The mediator nodded solemnly and began outlining next steps: documentation review, property adjustments, custody considerations. I barely heard her. I was staring at the ring, Evan's ring, lying on the table between us. He must have taken it off mid-meeting. When the mediator finished, he pushed it toward me. "You can keep it," he said quietly. "You said it was just a joke. Consider this the punchline." I stared at him, unable to speak. He stood, thanked the mediator, and left. Outside the window, I saw him walking to his car. He opened the back door, helped Mia into her seat, and buckled her in with careful hands. She smiled at him, said something I couldn't hear. He smiled back, a small, peaceful smile I hadn't seen in years. That look gutted me. It wasn't anger or triumph, it was relief. He'd freed himself, and I was the one who handed him the key. That night, I sat on the kitchen floor, surrounded by paperwork, reading through every line. Property transfer, custody plan, all clean, legal, final. Each page felt like a quiet obituary for the life I'd mocked away. I kept thinking about that line he'd said early in our marriage. Humor only works when both people are laughing. Back then, I thought he was just being serious again. I didn't realize he'd been warning me. Now, the laughter was gone. All that was left was silence, the kind you can't out-talk, the kind that doesn't forgive. The final papers arrived a week later, thick envelope, official seal. I sat at the small table in my now half-empty living room, staring at it for a long time before opening it. Inside were the divorce decree, the custody agreement, and one small envelope within the larger one. The smaller envelope contained the ring. His ring. It wasn't shiny anymore, scratched, worn down. There was a small note folded around it. In his handwriting, "You said I was too serious. Maybe I should have laughed sooner." I pressed it to my chest and sobbed. Not just because it was over, but because he hadn't left out of anger. He'd left out of understanding. And that's harder to forgive. I moved into a small apartment across town. It was quiet, which used to be my least favorite thing. Now it was the only thing I could stand. I told everyone I was focusing on work, that things ended amicably. But the truth was, every time someone mentioned his name, my throat closed. Mia came over on weekends. At first, she was shy, watching me like she was waiting for the next punchline. I tried to be light again, to make her laugh. But one day, she said, "Daddy says you like jokes more than promises." I froze. I asked what she meant. She shrugged and said, "He said that's why he doesn't wear the ring anymore." I changed the subject, but I couldn't shake the sting. Even at 6, she understood something I hadn't, that the things I called jokes were just ways to hide from sincerity. One evening, I had to drop her off at Evan's. He came out to meet us in the driveway. He looked the same, but older somehow, calmer, steadier. He helped Mia out of the car, thanked me, and turned to go back inside. I said, "Can we talk?" He paused. "About what?" I said, "About us." He shook his head. "There is no us. There's just you and your story." I said, "I didn't mean to hurt you. You know that." He said, "You meant to win. You just didn't realize what the prize was." I took a step closer. "So that's it? After everything?" He looked at me, and for a second I thought I saw regret. But then he said, "You spent years teaching me that love was supposed to be funny. I finally learned to laugh. Just not with you." He went inside, closing the door softly behind him. I stood there for a while, staring at the lights in the windows. Inside, I could see Mia running to him, holding up one of her drawings. He crouched to see it, smiling again, that same gentle smile. When I got home, I took the ring from the drawer. I turned it in my hand, tracing the thin line where it had once rested on his finger. I remembered every time I'd teased him about it, how I'd said, "A ring doesn't prove love." Maybe I was right. Maybe the absence of one did. I thought about writing him a letter, explaining everything, apologizing properly this time, but then I realized there was nothing left to explain. He already knew who I was. He'd known for years. So instead, I wrote a single line on a scrap of paper and placed it next to the ring. I was only joking. The words looked pathetic the moment I wrote them. The next morning, I couldn't bring myself to throw the ring away. Instead, I put it in the same small drawer where he once kept it. It felt fitting, the end returning to the beginning. Days turned into weeks. People stopped asking questions. Life moved on around me, but something in me stayed frozen, suspended in that moment when he slid the ring across the table and walked away without hate. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see his expression from that day. Not angry, not sad, just final. The quiet look of a man who'd chosen peace over noise. And sometimes, when I hear laughter, loud, careless laughter, I catch myself flinching because it sounds too much like me. That night, before bed, I opened the drawer one last time. The ring gleamed faintly in the half-light. I whispered, "You won, Evan." Then, after a pause, I added, "No, you just stopped playing." I closed the drawer, turned off the light, and sat in the dark, listening to the silence that used to terrify me. Now it was all I had left, and maybe, for the first time, I understood why he loved it so much. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching,